Sydney here, and welcome to the Drunken Ork. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you might be aware of my love of the Deff Dread kit. I do love that kit. It's one of my favourite Ork kits. I think you can get a lot out of it, and I like trying to push it to see, you know, just what you can come up with that. Now, I finally hit my limit in game terms of having 9 Deff Dreads with the completion of this, the 9th Deff Dread. So we're going to have a look at how I put this together. It's the third of me Badmoon's shooty dreads. So I've got 3 Death Skull dreads, which are all 2 claws, 2 KMBs. I've got 3 Goth dreads, which are mostly all claws, or one of them does have 2 Scorchers as well, or instead of 2 of the claws anyway. And I wanted 3 Badmoon dreads. And I've done the one which is all KMBs. And I've done a dread which is all big shooters, Dagger Dread, and this is my Rocket Dread. Now, when putting these Deff Dread kits together, I've kind of slid slightly away from the Deff Dreads have 4 weapons options. I mean, they'll have 4 in the game, that's fair enough, that's the rules. But for the model, rule of cool's always been something I like to stick by. So I've decided to go a little bit more than just the 4, in the same way I did with the Dagger Dread. 4 big shooters, I thought it needs more than 4, so I put a lot more dagger weapons on that. So the same with the Rocket Dread, there's more than 4 rockets on it. I haven't actually counted how many rockets it's got on it, but there's a few. So let's have a look. It is putting the kit together and then a quick paint job. Now in this, I'm using still images for the build process. I'm going to try in the future for going more of a video method, if you like, showing the build in a video format. But I had done this before I had made that decision. So hopefully any future build videos will have some video in them as well, as opposed to just the stills. But for now, we've got the stills. So, you know, I'm not going to pull it apart and do it again, am I? So let's have a look. So to start with, I wanted this dread to have tracks, and I had the kind of like a servo haulers kit, so I decided I was going to use the smallest of those servo holders as the lower half of the dread. Basically that would be its engine, that would be its propulsion, that would have the tracks on and all the rest of it. So there it is. It's got a whacking great engine on it, and that'll save us having to put the engine on the back of the dread, along with any exhaust can be mounted into here as well. So there you go. I cut away the bottom half of the Deff Dread, blocked up the cavity with some plastic card, and I put what looks like a rocket tip, a big old domed thing. I don't even know where I got them from, but I've had a few of them knocking about, so I stuck one of those on top and left a hole under the dread just to mount it onto, to give it a little bit of a sort of swivel movement, so I could play with the position and the angle of tilt if I wanted to. I also put some green stuff cabling. Anytime I use green stuff and I've got a bit left over, I'll get the cable makers out. I believe they're also from green stuff, and I'll make some ribbed cables for his pleasure. And then just to sort of mount them, just to show it, you know, it connects up and more than just on the actual pivot joint. There it is from the front. Now, the front grille, I decided to replace that, or at least carve into that, a couple of recesses to fit some rockets. So this was the start of the journey of too many rockets. They're off the Space Marine Impulsor kit, which is a little transport, the floaty rhino. It's got little sponsons which you can have, I think it's storm bolters or whatever they are, frag, storm, chuckers. So I used those, as I hadn't used them on the Impulsor, and mounted them in there just for its first set of rockets. And then boxed in the side with some plastic card. And you can see from the side shot here, that's the angle I went with the actual main body of the dread. Pretty level, not leaning back, not leaning forward. In fact, I believe it's slightly turned, but not a great deal. I also had to stick a bit of plastic card on top of the servo hauler at the front, where the robotic arm normally sits. For the face of the dread, I went with the face plate with all the wires and scopes and lenses and what have you on, because that just seemed most appropriate. And for the lower part, I took the front of the missile array, again I think it's off the Impulsor, and I just built a plastic card mount there, just rounded off so it'll fit around the face of the can, and then going up to the rocket plate itself, just so he's spitting a load of rockets out of his big open mouth. as it were. Now this was the start of his left upper arm. It's a bit of plastic tubing, and I've stuck some bits on it. I think the bit on the left was actually the top of the exhaust of the servo hauler, which I decided not to use because it was a little bit too neat for an Orky vehicle. So I stuck it on the back of there, and that's a little nub on the front. Again, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what it's off. It looks a bit like a rocket, but it was just to give it a cap to the tube basically. Now you can see here I've stuck 4 rockets around that. Now the rockets I got from a Russian website called Soldark ages ago, and it was one of the Technolog kits. Lovely little tanks, great for bits, absolutely fantastic for tracks and rockets and girder sections and what have you. So I stuck those rockets on and then added a little sight, a couple of pairs of binoculars with a wire coming out the back, and stuck that on as well, just so it's got some kind of aiming mechanism, because you know, you've got to get them 5-ups from somewhere. Since I had the main engine block in the servo hauler and I wasn't going to put the engines or exhausts on the Deff Dread's back, I decided to have a couple of rail mounted larger rockets, like sort of Scud missiles. So there are a couple of the burner bombs, I think, from the burner bomber. I stuck a couple of little nodules on the back to make it look like it had propulsion as opposed to just stabilising fins for the dropping of the bomb, and stuck them on those rails. Again, those rails came from those Technolog kits. I attached those together with a couple of bits of plastic tubing, and the plastic tubing, because it's hollow, I was able to slide some more of that ribbed cabling in, just to, again, a little bit of detailing. Now on the back of the Dread, I angled off the mounting points where you'd normally fit the engines and stuck a couple of bits of right angled triangular plastic rod on, just to sort of give that a flat surface for it to mount onto. And I put those rails on just to give the rockets something to sit on top of. However, with the rockets on top, it just stuck out too far. They were far too big, and the profile just looked ridiculous. So in the end, I snapped off those girder bits and just used the triangular mounting for the rails directly. Now for the upper right arm, I needed a decent sized rocket launcher. It needed to be something physically of size with the one on the left. Now I'd had a Taurox I'd turned into a truck a while ago, and part of that, the kit comes with that missile array you see on the top. So I wanted to use that. Now I'd originally tried to stick it on top of the Deff Dread, but it looked like a hat because it was huge. It was very flat and very wide, so I thought I'll stick it on the arm. When I stuck it on the arm, turned sideways, it was just far too high, so in the end I cut it in half and folded it together. And that gave us 2 nice big flat panels either side, one of which I could mount a part of the normal Deff Dread arm onto to give us a nice swivel joint so I can mount it at any angle I wanted, and I stuck a sight on top. Now I don't know what that's off. I've got the feeling it's off, it might be off a land speeder. I don't think it's off the Land Raider side sponsons, but it's something like that. It's some sort of Imperial sight, but a sight's a sight's a sight. You know what I mean? Lots of lenses and that. And I can stick a little bit of the green stuff cabling in there too. And plus, on the right hand side of it, the outer side, that nice big flat panel, give us somewhere I thought I could do a little bit of freehand work, whether it was checks or tags or something like that. Maybe a glyph. I also had this little piece knocking about, which is, again, off an Imperial tank. I think maybe a Land Raider, or one. I think it's off one of the new kits. And by new, I mean one of the new Horus Heresy kits, where it's got it's like a Cyclone missile system type thing, and it's mounted to like one of the top hatches. Now this was going on top of the hatch of the Deff Dread itself, so I had to put the handle on top just so you can still lift it up. That just makes sense. And I figured that it's an extra way to get a lot of extra rockets in there as well. So here he is as a test fit, just with the arms blue tacked on. I've added a little spiked ram to him, which is just off the Killer Can kit. So he's got the rockets mounted on the front of the servo hauler body, plus his mouth rocket array, and one on top of his head, and the 2 big Scud missiles on the back. And then he's got obviously the 2 kit-bashed main rocket arms, and I just settled with using the standard Deff Dread rockets for the lower arms at this point. There he is from a slightly different angle. I've added some rivets onto the plasticard work, and he hasn't got any of his cables on at that point. Now in between the shoulder pads, there's a little power box and the plug for what is normally the banner pole. Now I didn't want to put a banner pole on him as such, but I did think that needed something. So I used this. This is the comms array off, I think it's the Impulsor again. I tell you what, the Impulsor's done quite a bit of work on this kit. Because if he's going to be a long range shooty dread, he needs to know where the targets are, so that made perfect sense to have some sort of radar dish up there. However, if I decided not to have him fully shooty, and I've done this with the Dagger Dread, I decided to give him some sort of combat option as well. So instead of one of those Deff Dread rockets on the lower arm, I took one of the Deff Dread arms and used the drill attachment from the Killer Can. It just seemed to be the most suited for what I had in mind. I then took one of the rockets from the Deff Dread and cut it in half, kept the wires on, and just mounted those either side, plus a little glyph plate at the shoulder. And that just gives you a close combat option with rockets. So if you want to play WYSIWYG, you can still play him with the 4 rockets, or you could play him with 3 rockets and a combat weapon. And I think that's a smashing idea in the game if there's a chance he's going to get stuck into combat at some point, because he goes from 3 attacks, it's strength 5, no AP, 1 damage, to 4 attacks, it's strength 10, minus 3 AP, 3 damage. Makes a world of difference, and all you're missing out is D3 rocket shots. And you're saving yourself some points as well, so, you know, I think it's not a bad idea to do that. But it gives you the flexibility to do whatever you decide. There's a couple of the exhausts off the Dread itself. I decided to use those instead of the old Imperial Adeptus Mechanicus ones, which look just a little bit, I know they're supposed to be ancient exhausts, but they still look a little bit too neat and tidy for my liking. So I took a couple of the Deff Dread exhausts, and because it's such a small contact area for gluing, I put a little pin in just to help them with their purchase. And that's mounted there, coming out over the back. Now the back here, as you can see, is a little control panel for some little tech priest to sit there punching buttons as he's moving crates or fixing holes. I don't know what to do. Now I did think about removing this altogether, either cutting it off or boarding it up, you know, just or even just smashing it up, go at it with a drill and a saw and basically wreck it, as if the orcs have tried to, you know, purge the machine spirit out of it with hammers and chisels and that. But in the end I decided to keep it, and I added a little bit of plastic card checker plate there just to increase the size of the step, and thought, right, well, if it's going to be there, it's got to have somebody manning it, and that's where this little fella came in. I believe it's one of the Forge World grots. He's got a backpack and he's got headphones. He's all, you know, kitted out for communications, and he had his hand in the air, so just by snipping and repositioning his arm, I lowered it a bit so it's closer to the controls. And there he is, standing on the back, doing what needs to be done. I don't know what that actually is, to be honest with you, but whatever needs to be done, he will be doing it. Now it is still that big skull with the cog on it. I just covered that up with a glyph plate. You can't be looking at some Adeptus Mechanicus cog glyph all day. Drive you mad, wouldn't it? So I just covered it up with a glyph plate in the end, make it a bit more orky. Now here's some of the bits. I've started painting here. To paint it, I will prime it with High Coat Matte Black Primer. Then I'll give it a blast with an airbrush with Vallejo gunmetal. Just gives it a nice even metallic coat, and then I rough it up a bit. I'll generally go over it with a brown contrast paint. Gilliman Flesh was always a favourite of mine. It's running out though, and I don't fancy stumping up a $5 for another one. Not when I've got other browns available. As long as it's not too deep. I don't want to be using Gore Grunter or anything deeper than that. But any of the things like Dark Oath Flesh, there's another one, Agaros Dunes, you know, ones I don't use too much of anyway normally. I wouldn't be using me Skeleton Horde on it. But stuff like that, just to give it a grimier colour, and then I'll give it a dry brush, heavier in some places, more than others, of a chocolatey brown, like Mornfang brown, just to show sort of rust. That's more towards the bottom of the vehicle, where the rust would be damp, and then Riser Rust, or any relatively bright orange, on the upper areas where the rust would be more dry. I do then tend to go back over it with a bit of silver as well, just like a gunmetal, just for a very light one, just to pick out the absolute edges of the model, just to show where the rust is sort of like worn away, and it just gives it a bit more of its metallicness back. So you can see that's been done to the weapon arms at the bottom of the picture. The main body, I've started putting the yellow on. Just GW, Avalon Sunset, and it was just stippled on with an old brush. Put the paint on the brush, wipe most of it off. Not as much as you would if you're going to do a dry brush, but you know, a decent amount of it. And then just stipple it on, just stab at the model. Do use an old brush if you're going to try this, because a new brush will be fucked. I mean, the old brush is fucked as well, but nobody cares about them. Once you've gone over it and you don't have to go right at the edges, so the metal's showing through around the edge, you can then go over it again more central and build up the yellow, so it's more saturated in the middle, it looks brighter, and at the edges it sort of wears out, it goes back to the bare metal itself. Dead easy, dead quick, pretty effective. At this point I've popped the tracks on, I've given them a dry brush of, I think it's Vallejo Desert Yellow, then Bone White, and then like a very, very light off-white shade. Basically the same colours I use to dry brush onto my bases. If you do your bases differently, do it differently. It's just, this is, you know, the dust off the ground as the tracks are trundling along. I've also painted some grime and what have you on here, just using things like streaking grime and inks. Just little dribble marks and patches and what have you. And the rockets were all painted with a darker red, and then just basically given a little spot of a bright red just at the top, just to make them pop a little bit. And some checkers up there on the shoulder pad too. That's it from the other angle. The cables were like a nice foresty green with just a wash on them, and then I can go over, just paint a line down the outer knobbles, technical term there, with something like mud green just to make them, again, pop a bit. And the odd section on here as well, I just painted black, with it being Badmoons. Black with just a very quick dry brush of a couple of shades of grey, just to mucky it up a bit. There you go. Now the benefit of painting the metallics first, I find, is that when I'm putting on the colours, I don't have to paint everything. You've got the whole thing looking a dirty metallic. It could, you know, you could stop there. I mean, you wouldn't, but you could. So when you're putting the colours on, you're adding, in the case of this Badmoon Dread, a lot of yellow, a bit of black, and other sort of splashes of colour, but you don't have to spend ages doing every little bit. For example, if you look at the standard Dread rockets there's only one little yellow panel at the back, but the rest of it looks absolutely fine. I'll go on to paint the cables and the rockets and what have you, but the main body of the launcher, it just stays that metallic-y, grimy, muggy colour. And I did start painting that outer panel on the upper right arm white, because I decided that was going to be checks. And with checks, I always start with a white background and then paint the black onto it. I know some people do it the other way around. Whatever floats your boat, kidder. There we go, there's some checks. Now that is a lot of checks. For quite a large area, it's a lot of checks, so I thought I need something else on there other than just checks. So I decided to paint a little Badmoon glyph on it. Now the paint I used, there's a clue in the picture. I used Balo Brown for the base of the moon, and then painted a little low light just on the underlying parts of the curves with that other brown. Gawthorpe Brown, forgot what it was there. Now you can still see some checks showing through the Balo Brown there. I had to give it quite a few coats, to be fair, just to cover that up. But we got there in the end. But this is obviously one of the early steps. So after a few more coats of Balo Brown, just as a base colour, if you like, for the moon, there you go. It pretty much covers that up. And I'm going to put a few more layers of colours on there as well. Started adding some yellows. The yellows would have been Avalon Sunset. Again, just at the upper points, just a little bit of shading. And once you've got that, it's just a case of putting on the detail. And that was just, like I say, very simple. Mouth, eyes, cheekbones, nostril curl. And I put a few little warty lumps on as well. Because I think that was going back to the Balo or possibly Gawthorpe Brown. And I would have used a brighter yellow than Avalon as well, just for the upper bits. And then add a tongue. Because everyone knows moons have tongues. So there's another shot. I've started adding some of the accent colour on. Now I use Vallejo Blue Green on most of my vehicles. It just ties everyone in. It pops a bit, especially on the Goth stuff. Badmoons don't really need it. They're flashy enough as it is. But you know, it's on there, and it's sort of like what I do. I still need to paint the lenses and what have you at this point. Always do them last. And there's just another shot from the back, showing some of the little accents on the glyph plates and what have you. And that was pretty much it, really. That's how he ended up. He's got his drill on with his the pair of rockets. He's got another pair of rockets on the other side. He's got the big 6-pack rocket launcher on his right and a 4-rack of rockets on the left. He's also got 2 massive scuds on his back, and if you want to count the ones on his front, feel free. But I can't be bothered. Painted a few little dags as well. Like on the servo holder base, there was a plate with some Imperial nonsense on. That got scratched off and just replaced with some black and white dags you can just about make out there. The lenses were mostly painted green. just because there wasn't much green on it apart from the cabling, and there's a couple of red ones on there as well. But everywhere you can see there, that's metallic. If you think of every little metallic bit there around the lens casings, the centre of the radar, there's panels on the servo hauler bit, the main body really of most of the weapons, all the little boxes and mounting points and all that. There's parts of the shoulder pads. All those would have been a massive pain in the arse to paint. I say a massive pain in the arse, I mean that's what the hobby is really, so you know, you should enjoy it. But I find it easier if I paint all that, the whole model first, and that scruffy, tatty up metal, and then just add the colours. Because all the bits like that you don't need to do because they're already done. There you go. That is my Badmoon Rocket Dread. So that's 9 dreads in total. I'm going to do a little showcase video soon featuring all 9 dreads with video. So, you know, rotatified on a little turny table so you can see them from all angles. Because to be fair, you do get a much better idea of what they look like when you can see all the way around them 360, as opposed to just trying to find that, what's it called, the golden angle where you get the most out of it, because there's still stuff on the other side. I suppose that's why GW put the even they've got, like, on their website, they've got the pick with a 360 so you can turn it yourself and have a look at all angles, and it, you know, it's the best way to get an idea of what a model's like. So yeah, I'm going to do that, so that should be coming up soon. But for now, let's just, as is usual, let's just end with a montage of still images. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and give that bell a little tickle. I wouldn't want you to miss out. Until next time, take care. Bye bye.